Special program this morning. We're very, very happy to have Chief Kenny Winslow with us. Chief, we do very brief introductions here as a habit. The chief has served since July of 2013 as police chief, City of Springfield. I did send some information out that I hope many of you read. But at this time, I'd like to present the Chief of Springfield Police, Kenny Winslow.
Good morning. I was told I have 30 minutes, so I can get a little long, so I'm going to jump right into it. Back in 2016, we started looking at our gun violence problem in our community, and we started trying to look at how we address it. Obviously, we're pretty good about displacing crime, especially when people are uncooperative. With that, we're also pretty good about, coming in, doing some extra patrols, zero tolerance patrols, and basically pushing it underground for a little while. But we started looking at what are the drivers of crime in our community? What can we do different? Over the years, gun violence in our community has been pretty steady. We had a nice spike last year in 2017, which really was when we really started looking at hard of trying to get this grant going, get this implementation grant, getting everything up and going. So back in 2016, we applied for a planning grant. We researched some best practices throughout the country, some that are a little controversial, some that didn't have a whole lot of data to back it up, some that had some positive results. And basically what we did is we decided to try this Focused Deterrence Initiative. The Focused Deterrence Initiative started in Boston, Massachusetts back in the early 2000s. The program ran for about 4 years, and in that 4-year span, it had some pretty good numbers, reducing gun violence in our community, group gun violence, I should say, in our community, by about 20 to 30%. That was kind of the best that was out there at the time. The same program, or a hybrid of that program, was used in High Point, North Carolina. It's been in High Point, North Carolina for a little over a decade now, around 12 years, and they've seen about the same numbers, 25 to 30% reduction in group gun violence in their community. So we looked at that, and we looked at some other programs, and we decided that we would write a grant, basically bring a hybrid of that program here. With doing so, we partnered with SIU Carbondale and a researcher down there named Tammy Colchel, who was imperative to Boston's initiative. She was with Boston PD at that time when she was out there and they rolled the program out. So we thought, why not get on the ground floor, get Tammy involved with us. She also did a similar program in St. Louis County after Ferguson that they're currently working down there, and signed on to help us with this program. So with this, what we did is we took a look at gun violence, and we take a look at drivers of gun violence in our community. We conducted a community survey of the entire community, a sample survey of the entire community, and then a door-to-door survey in what we call our Quad 4 area. In our Quad 4 area, what we did is when we looked at this, we said, okay, where are the majority of our crimes at? The majority of our gun violence and group gun violence occurs in our Quad 4 area. And our Quad 4 area, if you're not familiar with it, is basically 11th Street all the way to I-55, Carpenter Street South. So if you take that section of our community, that's where 49% of our gun violence is. And we'll get into this and we'll talk about a little bit of numbers. I don't want to bore you with statistics, but we'll get a little bit of statistics in there, and then we'll talk to you about how we've rolled this out, how the program rolls a little bit more, and we'll go from there. But to give a little background, we'll start out. What is Focused Deterrence? Well, Focused Deterrence is a strategy aimed at reducing crime, strengthening community partnerships, as well as building local partnerships. We know we cannot do this alone. And gun violence affects so much more than just quality of life. It's quality of life for the people who live in that community, people who are fearful to let their children out to walk to school, people who are fearful to sit out in their yard and have a barbecue. But it's also economic development. Who wants to develop in an area that's, riddled with gun violence? People want their employees to feel safe. So it has an effect all the way around. It also has an effect on our officers. Our officers have to go, they see trauma, they have to deal with the trauma. They're constantly getting called there. It ties up resources. It also affects the hospitals, and most of the people who are gunshot victims, they're group or gang gunshot victims, usually don't have insurance. So there's a dollar amount that you can put to this too. So it affects more than just the quality of life. It affects all of that plus so much more. Over the past 4 years, from 2014 to 2017, shots fired calls for Springfield have averaged around 800 calls per year, as you can see by the chart and the trend lines here. We had a little bit of a dip in 2013 down to like 580, I believe it was. But as you can see, the trend is around 800 shots fired call per year. What is a shots fired call? Well, that could be anything. All right? That's not a confirmed shots fired. That could just be somebody calling in fireworks. It could be somebody calling in backfire on a vehicle, or it could people just calling in to say, hey, I want to get the police out here quickly. Oftentimes people will call and say, hey, there's an argument out here, disturbance out here. Well, that's not the highest priority call on our priority list, so when they don't see the police coming quickly, they call back and they say, hey, they're shooting, and then we get out there and find out they're not shooting. So there's no way to differentiate all that without going through every call for service. But it still gives you an idea of the amount of calls or shots fired calls that we respond to every year. When it's a shots fired call, instead of sending one officer, you're sending multiple officers. You're sending 3, 4 officers to that call because you don't know what you're walking into. So that ties up our resources. We talked earlier about Quad 4. As I spoke earlier, Quad 4 is basically 11th Street, east to I-55, Carpenter Street, all the way south. And with that, what we did is when we started putting this program together, we started looking at where is the majority of our shots fired calls at. Well, 49% of our shots fired call historically occur in the Quad 4 area. So we have a higher concentration of officers in that area, a higher concentration of resources in that area. We drill down even further. This is what we refer to in the police department as the box. Now, it's not a complete box, but that's what we refer to it as. As you see, if you take the bigger box, it runs from Cook Street to Ash Street, 13th Street, over to Wheeler. And then it's got a little part up on the top. When we drill down, this is where the highest concentration of that 49% is. When you look at that 49% in Quad 4, you drill down just on those facts, this is 83% of those calls. So 83% of that 49% is in this small area. What are our goals? Obviously, is to reduce gun violence. And when I say gun violence, I'm talking about group or gang gun violence. Is to work with the community in disproportionately affected areas of violence, and also to build better, strong police community relationships. Nothing's more frustrating than showing up on a shooting and people are out there, there's 15, 20 people out there, I didn't see nothing. I heard the shots and I came out and I didn't see nothing. Well, then you get one witness that says, no, there was like 20 people out here. All those people over here telling you they didn't see nothing, they were all out here. It's frustrating. We cannot solve crime, reduce gun violence in our community without cooperation. So in order to do that, we have to have better police-community relations. And in order to have a relationship with somebody, you have to have trust. And in order to have trust, you have to have communication. So that's what we're really trying to concentrate on as one arm of this program, is to build better community relations. And we do that by getting out and speaking to our community, listening to our community, hearing what they have to say. They're a wealth of information. And we do that by getting out of our cars and walking and talking. We get out of our cars by doing positive impact through positive contact, by communicating with people when we're not called. When we're called, it's already out of control. We have to come, take control of the situation, then deal with what's at hand. That's the wrong time to try to build community relations. So you have to have a sustainable approach to that beforehand. And that's what we've been trying to do for the last 5 years. Obviously, our objectives here are to address the most serious violent offenders. When we started looking at our stats and we started looking at all the shots fired, the confirmed shots fired, what we saw there was that there's a small group of people that are responsible for that. And when we looked at that group of people in our community, that's about 75 to 100 people is what we had to narrow down to. That's still a large number. We thought the best way to approach this by looking at other programs was to take like the top 10, top 15 people, concentrate on them first, then move on to the next 10, next 15. The thing about gun violence and gang violence is that it is constantly an evolving situation. You take one or two off, one or two replace them, etc. One thing in our community is guns and drugs go hand in hand. That's not to say that's in every community, and that's not to say every time there's a shooting that it's drug-related or gang-related. But when it is gang-related or group-related, it is typically involving drugs or some type of disturbance involving disrespect or money. We wanted to partner with impacted communities. What we did in the survey and what we found out is that a lot of times what the community sees as the drivers in crime, and what also research has shown us in other areas and our own research, is that there's a lot more that plays into it. There's a lack of morals or family support or a breakdown in the family structure in the home that plays a role in it. Not always, but there is that part in most of it. Drugs and money play a role in it. Social economics, a lack of jobs. A feeling in the community that you can get by with it. People don't want to be caught by the police. They don't want to go to jail. So they go to those neighborhoods where people don't call the police, or they don't testify, or they don't cooperate with the police. They're not good witnesses. They're the people who say, you know what, I don't want to get involved, I'll mind my own business and I'll go I'll go on about it. So when you have that kind of feeling in the neighborhood, that's where gun violence thrives at. Because I can go there, I know I can do this, and I know nobody's going to call the police, or if they do call the police, they're not going to cooperate. The police are going to come, we're all going to scatter, and then we're done. We're going to move on to the next place. So it's about how can we address some of those issues. Other issues that came up were mental health, lack of education, the dropout rate. When we started looking at our offenders, we started looking at their education past. And what we saw as we built these case files on guys, and all of our offenders right now are guys. There could be a girl at some point, but right now they're all guys. When we started looking at their case files, most of them do not have a high school education. Most of them do not have a job. Most of them do not have job training. Most of them have a breakdown in the family structure somewhere along the way. So we started looking at how can we address some of those things. The focused deterrence program is based on what they call call-in model. And the call-in model is basically where you're going to identify the top 10, 15 people is what we limit it to. And basically, we bring them in front of what we call a multidisciplinary team. That multidisciplinary team is made up of members of the U.S. Attorney's Office, the State's Attorney's Office, the Springfield Police Department, Department of Corrections, Juvenile Probation, Sangamon County Probation, community members, District 186, various social services, including Springfield Mental Health, SIU School of Medicine, et cetera. We brought them together, and basically what we do is we prepare a case file on our major offenders or our worst offenders or habitual offenders. And what we do is we prepare a blind case file. There's no names attached to it, there's no identifiers attached to it. It basically consists of intelligence, it consists of criminal histories, recent criminal histories, and it consists of police reports where they were maybe with somebody who was involved in a shooting, maybe they were the driver of a car, but they weren't the actual person who pulled the trigger, et cetera. And what we do is we present almost in like a jury fashion to them and say, these are the case files, we do a presentation on it, and then they select who they think should get our extra attention, who should get this effort of a combination of social services and police attention. The last time we did this, I think we brought together 17 case files, and they selected 11 of the 17 to get this extra attention. What we were looking for is, if we address these people, can we make a dent and drive down gun violence? And that's the reason we select a small amount. That small amount we think is responsible for a large portion of it. There are people who are seen as leaders in their groups, people that are seen as the gunmen, the muscle in their group, et cetera, and how we can push them down. And if we remove them from the group, hopefully it will make the group kind of calm down. And then also be kind of as a signal or a warning to the group that you could be next. So on the call-in model, we call them in, we call them in, basically we give them two options. There's really only two options. The option one is what we've always had. Change your ways or go to prison, remove you from our community. This is not a soft on crime approach. This is a sincere effort to help people. Option two is, look, your behavior's got to change. And if you're willing to change, we're willing to sit down with you, with our professional partners, have them screen you for whatever resources we can provide for you, and we will help you. That could be a mentor, as I said earlier, that could be job training, that could be mental health screening, et cetera. Whatever your issues are, we will try to work with you. Our program is also headed by an outreach coordinator. So basically, after we have this call-in, they have a choice to make. When they have their choice, they can decide, hey, I'm going to take the help. I want to change my life. We'll hook them up with our outreach coordinator. He'll get them hooked up with the social service people and the screeners, and they'll come up with an individual case file for them to help them, our program for them to help them move forward. They can say, thank you, but I don't want your help, and I'm going to go on about my ways, and I'm not going to get in trouble. Okay, that's good. We like that too. Or they can go about their ways, continue to do what they're doing, and then we will work with our law enforcement partners to remove them from our community. Kind of hit this just a minute ago. Also in our MDT is community leaders. And when I talk about community leaders, I'm talking about not just our elected officials while they have a role there. I'm talking about the grassroots leaders, the leaders in the community that are influential over people, especially young men who maybe don't have a father, maybe who come from a broken family, maybe who don't have an education, people who can relate to them. And one of the roles of these grassroots leaders is to be a moral voice, to be that voice and explain how gun violence affects our community. As I stated earlier, gun violence affects so much more than just the victim. Many times we think that the victim is the only victim. Well, it's not. In a victim of a shooting, you may have somebody who's dead, you may have somebody who's disabled for life, etc. But you also have the person who shot them. I know it sounds kind of foolish to say this, and it was one of those things I had to open my eyes to, and my way of thinking to, is that it also affects the suspect's family. The suspect's probably going to go away for a long time. On top of that, their family is going to lose their loved one. You know, a child may be left fatherless in this type of incident. There's just so much it can affect, so much more. It also creates that fear in our community. That fear, as we talked about earlier, that omnipresence fear of, hey, I can't go outside, I can't let my kids walk to school, etc. It creates so much more of an impact than just the victims. And so we try to look at how can we reach these young men. As I stated earlier, these are some of the social services that we provide. Mentoring has been a huge one so far. Basically, we know that people need that positive change, and change isn't easy, and you need somebody basically there to walk every step with them. So who can do that? Is it the police that can do that? Is it a faith member of our community that can do that? Is it a football coach? Is it an uncle, a cousin? Who is that person in their family or in their circle of friends that can reach them? Is it maybe somebody who's kind of walked in their shoes, done what they've done, but changed their life? Is it a former offender that can provide that service? As we stated earlier, District 186 is on board with us, along with Lincoln Land Community College, for GED assistance, job skills, soft skills, anger management, substance abuse, housing. That was one I had never really thought about, housing. Some of these people, after we've interviewed them, have stated, hey, I'm going house to house, from friend to friend, girlfriend to girlfriend, because I got no place to stay. Something I would have never linked to gun violence, to be honest, before this research and before we started actually looking into it, how that would play a role in whether somebody was going to be involved in gun violence. And it comes down to what we were told by someone, is that acceptance, that love and that feeling they get from the gang or the group. And so in order to get that love and feeling, I got to go out and I got to be the man, and I got to be the man who does the dirty work. Yeah, come on. Back in May of this year, we did our first call-in. We identified 10 targets. It was actually 11. Before we got to the 11th one, he was incarcerated. The day before we had our call-in, he went out and shot somebody, and we were able to lock him up on that shooting. So we only had 10 at the call-in. 8 attended. 2 of us told them to pound sand. We had no real anchor to get them there, so they told us to pound sand. They're not coming. The targets ranged in the ages of 19 to 27. We had 10 impact speakers, and this is really what the program's built upon. And they were representatives of law enforcement, prosecution, the community, former offenders, and families of shooting victims. And this is really where the rubber hits the ground in this program. I know when I stand there in front of these offenders, they're only going to hear a little bit of what I'm saying. It's going in one ear and out the other ear. They don't care about me. They've heard from law enforcement before. They've heard from their parents before. They're not paying attention to them. But we still can deliver that message. We deliver that 2 options to them, or 3 options. Just go out there and live your life and don't do anything. You won't hear from me or my people. Prosecution. They've heard from prosecution before. Many of these offenders have been, in fact, all of them have been incarcerated at some point in time, whether it's been in the county jail or in the state system. They've done it. They've done their 1.5 years, 2 years in state time. There's nothing more frustrating to the police officers and law enforcement that when you make an arrest for somebody on a shooting or a felon in possession of a gun, and they get sentenced to 3 years and they end up doing, a little under 1.5 years. It's frustrating that basically there doesn't seem to be enough teeth, in my opinion, sometimes in our gun laws. And these people who come out and they torture our community are released after a short period of time. So when they hear this message with prosecution, though, they're hearing a little bit different. They're hearing from the U.S. Attorney's Office, where you're going to do 85% of your sentence. You're hearing from the state's attorney as well. And then you hear them both say, we are working together looking at each one of your cases. Every one of these cases or reports that come across with your name on it, we're looking at it and we're strategizing to see how we can get the biggest bang for the buck. How much time, who can put you away quicker and faster. And then when they hear that and they go, oh man, they're working together. I ain't gonna get no plea bargain this time. I can't plea bargain this shooting or this possession of a gun down to something much smaller. I'm gonna go and really face some punishment here. So it was, I won't say it was unique because we worked very well together in law enforcement with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the State's Attorney's Office in Sangamon County, but it was a way of them hearing it firsthand and knowing that on a biweekly basis, we are sitting down with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the State's Attorney, and we are going over your case file. You've been identified, we are going over your case file, and we're deciding, hey, I can get him 3 years here, I can get him 8 years here. Where are we getting the biggest bang for the buck? And then telling them, there's no plea bargains. You can bring your attorneys in, we're gonna go for the biggest hammer here, and that's what we're gonna try to do. So that kind of got them perking up a little bit, you know, they still had their heads down, they still had their arms kind of slouched, kind of like, hey, this is a joke. One of them was laughing through most of it. Then they heard from community members, people who lived in that Quad 4 area, people who have to talk about how, hey, I'm afraid to let my kids walk out to go down to the bus stop. I have to walk them to the bus every day 3 blocks away because I'm afraid to let my kid walk down or that he might get hit by gun violence or maybe get robbed by somebody who's armed with a weapon, et cetera. And how that affects them in their daily lives. Next they heard, and this is where I think a lot of it really started to hit home, and you started to see their demeanors change, you started to see their shoulders slouch, you started to see them break down a little bit. And that's when we brought in former offenders to talk to them. This was kind of hard for us in the police department to look at because we were looking for people who we knew had been involved in something similar in the past, but were 100% doing the right thing now. We knew that the program hinges on finding the right people. If you put the wrong people, if there's somebody who's maybe not 100% clean, they're straddling both sides of the line. Maybe I'm trying to do the right thing, but I'm over here and I'm also doing some stuff on the side. That could make our program fail. So we took several months trying to identify these people. And when we did identify them, they were a huge success. Should have probably put this slide earlier. When we talked about the shots fired, we said there was 800 shots fired trending. These are actually the confirmed shots fired. And what you'll see, so far in 2018, now granted we did not start this program until May. So far in 2018 through July, shots fired are down 22% citywide from last year. That's encouraging to us, okay? We don't know exactly why. We've done a lot more saturation patrols. We've removed a lot of guns and a lot of offenders this year by surgical approaches instead of zero tolerance approaches to gun enforcement in our community. In addition to that, though, in the month of July, we saw a little bit of a spike. They were up by 5. I think instead of 10 last year, they're up to 15 this year. So that's why when you have small numbers, it looks like a 50% increase. While it's up by 5, that's a lot. Here's the interesting part. Remember, when we start this program, we talk about all these efforts that we are talking about occur in Quad 4, not the entire city. They're concentrating in Quad 4. Now, that's not to say that if we start displacing targets to other areas of the city, we won't concentrate on that because it's the offenders that we are targeting. We will go wherever the offender goes. But in Quad 4 this year, up to last month we were down 42% in confirmed shots fired and down 23% from this time last year. Those are big numbers. Those are big numbers for us. They're encouraging numbers. Do we know if that's going to be sustainable? We don't know. It's too early to judge the program. One thing I should back up is before we rolled this program out, we met with several groups in our community to try to get some buy-in into the programs. We also went door to door in Quad 4, my staff, my officers, and we spoke to everybody in those neighborhoods. And when I should say Quad 4, I should say the box in Quad 4. We walked the box, and we told them, hey, this is what you can expect to see. You're going to see more officers out on bikes. You're going to see more officers out on foot patrols. You're going to see more officers just walking and talking to people. If they see a group of people on the street, it's our initiative to get out and talk to those people. You can't detain them, but you can do what we call voluntary contacts with them. And that may be nothing more than, hey, how's it going, fellas? And hey, start talking. You know, if they want to walk off, they walk off. If they want to leave, they leave. But it's built a little bit more of a relationship. But what we wanted the community to know is that when you see these officers out here, it doesn't mean that something bad is going on. It's just something that we are trying to do to address this issue. And it's also trying to build that more positive or better police-community relations. So with that, we're too early in the system or in the program to tell if it's successful. We're encouraged by what we're seeing, but 1 month could blow these stats all out of the water. What is a success? When we started talking to programs, when we were researching this, most of the people told us that, hey, you're going to have to make an example out of somebody. These offenders are they're hardcore. They're not going to get on with the program until you make an example of somebody. Most departments said the same thing. The first year, 5 to 10%. If you get 5 to 10% of the people who participate in this program to take advantages of the services and not be involved in gun violence anymore, that will be a success. So that's where we kind of set our first target goal this year, was 10%. If we could see 10% of the people who come through the program be successful, we would consider that a success. The other thing is, can we drop the shots fired? And when I look at shots fired, I'm really talking about the confirmed shots fired. Those are the ones where we show up and there's evidence of a crime. That could be broken window glass, that could be victims there, that could be a house that's shot up, that could be casings in a roadway, that could be just two people or witnesses that says, yeah, there was two cars out here, they were shooting at each other, but there's no casings. Just something to confirm what happened, other than an anonymous call of a shots fired and we get there and can't find nothing. And we really have to look at those, because those are the numbers you have to drive down. If you can drive down those confirmed shots fired, that will be a success, because that will tell us we're making an impact. The other thing we have to remember is, even though we're having 800 shots fired calls a year, some of those could be multiple calls. As I stated earlier, some of those could be false calls. But we also know there's underreporting or no reporting going on in certain neighborhoods of our community. We had an incident a few months ago where there was 14 rounds fired off in the middle of the daytime, and nobody called. Nobody called the police. Just had an officer in the area that heard the shots, went to the area, found the shell casings in the road, started knocking on doors, and that's when we found out what happened. But nobody from the community called. So we know there's some underreporting or a lack of reporting go as well. So what is the true number of shots fired or actual confirmed shots fired in the community? We don't know 100%. If we don't get the call, we don't know. One thing we did in this research, though, looking back at all of our offenders, there were some commonalities there. 90% identified with gang members have a documented burglary, theft, or criminal damage history as juveniles. What that tells us that we have to reach these people younger. It tells us that they don't automatically come out being a shooter. They start at the petty crimes. They start out as the opening unlocked car doors and stealing whatever in the car. They start out with retail thefts. They start out with burglarizing homes, and they graduate on up the scale until they start carrying a gun and doing violence. So we have to try to address that. And that takes manpower, and that's something that, you know, we're always arguing for more. We're always arguing to maintain what we have. With that said, we're looking at ways, how can we interact more at an earlier age? One way we do that is through our school resource officers or our school safety officers in the schools. One way we're doing that is by basically, even in the middle schools, having off-duty there. Well, I would love to have school resource officers in the middle schools. It's just not there right now. That's something we're going to try to work with District 186 to get done. But it's even the elementary schools. It's about having that positive impact, that positive contact at a young age. It's about those kids getting to know these officers and seeing them as a positive role model at a young age. That's through our junior police academy. That's through our outreach efforts, whether it's our Bridging the Gap barbecue or whether it's block parties, whether it's just walking into the schools. It's about trying to reach those young kids at a younger age. It's about working with District 186 and our parochial schools to identify kids who may be at risk and being able to get involved in an earlier age with social services, with law enforcement, to try to bring everything together. As I tell people, we can't be everything to everybody, but one thing we're pretty good at is directing traffic. And as I tell people all the time, we may not be able to help them, but maybe we can be that conduit that will get them the help they need. So if we can work together to do that, that's what we're going to try to do. Again, that's basically what our Focus Deterrence program is in a nutshell right now. At this time, I'll open up for questions from you guys.
Do you try giving officers some sensitivity training, diversity training, or just cultural training about people that they are working with? And do you try through this other means to help ameliorate any conscious, unconscious profiling?
Yes. Basically, every officer is given diversity training, cultural awareness training. The city started a Crossroads program several years ago, partnering with the Dominican Sisters here in town to bring that program to the city. While not all of our officers have been through that full program, they've had other diversity training in addition to that. They get it in the basic training academy. They get it in our annual training as well. Something we started and the law now mandates, and it's very expensive, but we've been working on it. The FBI has been a great partner with us on this, is basically what we call unconscious bias training, and I think that's probably what you're talking about there. And basically, that's just being aware of your biases, realizing that we are all raised a certain way, we're all grown, that we all have a bias, and being aware of that bias so it doesn't influence us on our decision-making process. So yes, we do provide that training. We started providing the unconscious bias training last year. It's something that we will be doing on an annual basis going forward. But yes, it's about getting those officers out there to meet those people. You know, and there's some change that has to go in the department too. You know, when I talk about change, some officers don't see this as real police work, and it's about changing their mindset and changing the culture to let them know that, hey, we have to do this. We have to work together, and this is why, you know, good community relations is a good thing, why positive community relations is a good thing. It's about working together to improve the community. We can't do it by ourselves. And so, as I always tell people, my goal is when I leave here, before I leave here, my goal is to be able to show up at a shooting or a homicide, or my guys show up at a shooting or a homicide, and somebody go, yep, it was Kenny Winslow who did this, or whoever who did this, and I seen him leave in this car. Instead of spending the first 8 or 9 hours running down a bunch of lies and a bunch of nonsense, to be honest with you, that's just throwing us off the trail. I want people to feel comfortable coming forward with that information. I want them to feel that there's a trust involved there, that they can trust us to resolve the issue and handle the issue appropriately. I want them to feel confident and to have the courage to provide the information that's needed.
Please thank Chief Winslow for joining us this morning. Thank you, sir.